But yeah, and after the Duke of Buckingham dies, he wants to figure out who the guy is that killed him and stuff like that. And then, of course, Parliament says no. And so we enter into this time period known as the 11 Years of Tyranny. The 11 years that Charles ruled alone, right? He ruled alone with no parliament, collected taxes on his own, did all this other stuff, made forced loans, seized property, and violated the Magna Carta. In multiple different ways, right? So the big thing about it, though, as well, is he didn't call it the 11 Years of Tyranny. That's what the English called it, right? He called it his personal rule, right? And the people, of course, hated him during this time period. Absolutely were disgusted by him because he's over there living the best 11 years of his life, having kids with his wife. They're like, marriage is rekindled. They're like obsessed with each other now because he's ruling all by himself. He's redesigning the palace and making it look really nice. Hiring this guy named Peter Paul Rubens to come paint the whole ceiling in a way that's just so grandiose and over the top, spending, I don't know, millions in English tax money on his house, right? This is very, very attempt at absolutist, as you can see. But then something big happens, right? Something big happens. This little thing known as the Bishops' War, right? The Bishops' War is a rebellion that breaks out, right? Okay, now a rebellion breaks out in Scotland because the Archbishop of Canterbury, underneath Charles, tried to impress this book upon the Scottish, right? This thing known as the Book of Common Prayer, right? They were like, hey, Presbyterians, use our book instead. And the Presbyterians were like, how about not? Punch, 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 and literally start a massive rebellion, right? So Charles is forced to bring Parliament back to try and solve the issues with this war, raise money for this war, right? This Bishop's War, as it's so aptly named. When he brings Parliament back, his period of time is known as the Long Parliament, right? Because Parliament actually stays in session for over a year, right? Which is rare. It doesn't normally happen. Now, in this whole process, though, during Parliament's Long Parliament, they decide to check his authority. They try and execute his closest friend. Now, this is where we left off, right? This is where we left off in class. We talked about how, like, Henrietta walks up. And it's like, what the heck, bro? I've been gone for 5 minutes and you let them kill your best friend, right? Like, so like, this is absolutely ridiculous. You should go down there because I've heard a rumor. Yeah, I know. All right, so, and the rumor is that apparently Parliament started the war on purpose, and the rebellion in Ireland as well, to keep their authority in power without ever being dissolved, right? Oh no! So Charles, feeling all about himself, all 5'2" of himself, decides to march down there with the Imperial Guard, go down to Parliament, and he wants to arrest the top 5 members of Parliament, right? He wants to arrest all 5 of them, and literally he goes down there, marches down there, and the parliamentarians close the door, right? They close and lock the door to the House of Commons, and he bangs on it with his cane, this thing symbolized today as the black rod of the king, or the black rod of Charles, bangs on the door and says, open the door in the name of the king, and literally the people in Parliament go, tee. No, and they refuse to open the door. And this is hilarious because it's just impugning Charles's power. It demonstrates in this moment that no, you are not an absolutist because we are not opening this door for you because we are the House of Commons. We represent the people and you stink. All right, so like what ends up going down though is that the soldiers break the door down and the 5 men that actually they were there to arrest escaped out of back door, which I find hilarious. I'm sorry. It's so anticlimactic, you know what I mean? That he's banging on the door going, open the door in the name of the king. And they're just like, tee-hee-hee, no. And then 5 little old men in black robes just go, and just like sneak out of a back door is so funny to me. All right, so like now look. So the big thing about it though in general is Charles, now ridiculously embarrassed, decides that he needs to put the Parliament in check permanently. And he's like, you know what I'm doing? Can't do this anymore. Can't let these kids just cop this attitude all the time. I'm going to raise myself an army. All right, so like Charles goes up into northern England at the border of England and Scotland, and he wants to raise an army so he can go back down to London and attack the Parliament. Well, you know what? 2 can play at this game, Charles. You want to raise an army? I'm going to raise an army. So the Parliament raises one as well. But wait a minute, y'all. We've got an army by the king and an army by the Parliament in the same country about to clash with each other. We got a civil war on our hands, right? And it's going to last from 1642 to 1651, right? Known as the English Civil War. Just burn that image into your mind real quick. The English Civil War, right? Now, the big thing about it is, if you're going to talk about an English Civil War, you got to talk about the 2 sides that are fighting each other, right? And also, best way to relate to it is we have had a civil war, right? The Americans have had a civil war. The United States has had a civil war before. In our civil war, we had nicknames for either side, right? So we had nicknames for the other side and stuff like that. The people from the Union Army referred to the Southerners and the Confederates as rebels. And then, of course, the Confederate Army referred to the Union Army as Yankees, right? So as you can tell, we have a proper name for our army. And then we have the nickname for army, right? So what these people are, Charles supporters, okay, also known as the Old Model Army is their official name. Charles supporters are known as Cavaliers, right? Cavaliers against these other people that were the parliamentarians, the New Model Army, or AKA the Roundheads, right? Now looking at these two individuals really, really closely together, really fast, Roundheads didn't call themselves Roundheads. Charles's army called them Roundheads. Why did they call them Roundheads? Mostly due to the fact that, one, they said apparently the boys that played the drums in their divisions and stuff like that, because most of the parliamentarians were made up of middle-class and lower-class army officers, right? And so the thing about it is their drummer boys and stuff like that would oftentimes shave their heads to avoid lice, okay? So they called them Roundheads because they had shaved heads. Or it could be referring to their helmet and stuff like that. Also, Roundheads is like a slight. It's a jeer. It's like a making fun of them. It's like a pointing at them and laughing and be like, aha, Roundhead, you're poor. Now, that's the parliamentarian army, right? And then the other side is the Cavaliers. Now, y'all know the Cavaliers. There's these teams called the Cleveland Cavaliers. There's the, the Virginia Cavaliers, UVA, those Cavaliers and stuff like that. What a Cavalier is, though, is it's a slight from the Roundheads. It's referring to them as Caballeros, or basically foreigners, basically kind of knocking them for being these Spanish men on horseback, right? Now, as you can tell, though, the Charles supporters are much more wealthy, right? They're much more wealthy, and they're very well defined by several things. You can spot a Cavalier from a mile away because of three particular items. One, their long and luxurious hair, right? Now, two, their mustache, and three, the ostrich feather that had become very popular and very, very expensive to wear in your hat at the time, right? Now, ironically enough, I think it's really funny that LeBron James started his entire career as a Cavalier playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and LeBron James is also known as King James, right? Get it? King James, Charles's dad. King James, LeBron James, Cavaliers. Makes complete sense, right? Illuminati confirmed. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, all right, when we're looking at this, we also got to talk about their leaders. So, as we know, the Cavaliers are being led by Charles's military officers and Charles himself. And the Roundhead leader is a very important figure. It's a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell. You need to get to know this ugly man very, very well. Why am I calling him ugly? Because he called himself ugly repeatedly. All right, so now, actually, fun fact, later on after the war's over and stuff like that, they're painting a portrait of him, and they ask him, they're like, oh, sir, do you want us to leave anything out? And he goes, no, paint me warts and all, because apparently he had some warts on his face and stuff like that. It's also an expression just basically referred to me, paint me as I look, not as you want me to look rich and stuff like that. But Oliver Cromwell is a very crass and very intense military leader, right? And at several different battles, at the Battle of Naseby and at the Battle of Edge Hill, he defeats Charles's armies using specific military strategy, using the weather, using flanking movements and stuff like that, and the Roundheads end up coming up victorious under this man. Now, it's very important that we know something about Oliver Cromwell, though. Put this next to his name. He's a Puritan, right? So he's a Puritan, which means that he does not like fun in any iteration whatsoever. He's not a fun-loving guy. He's not coming to your birthday party and bringing the best hors d'oeuvres, right? He's actually coming to your birthday party and being like, stop singing, put the beer away, wear black and white, take that streamer down. Rah! Oliver Cromwell, not the nicest guy on the planet. And speaking of his warts, there's one of them right there. Now, Oliver Cromwell, though, comes into power, and what ends up going down is he regains the power of the Parliament. Charles's forces are defeated in the English Civil War, and he comes in and he says, now, Charles, you have two options here. One, you can sign these new documents, let us limit your power forever, and take responsibility for this war, or we can hold you for the crimes you've committed against the English people. Well, since the Roundheads are victorious, Charles has to do what they say. Well, actually, funny enough, he refused to. And one day when he was playing chess, he got a piece of paper that was brought to him, and it actually was for his death. Because Charles refused to give in to the Parliament still, and so they tried him and executed him. Charles I is the only English monarch, and only monarch up to this point in history, there's going to be another one, Louis XVI, we'll talk about him in France, which will be tried by his own people and executed, right? So they put Charles on trial, accused him of treason, and he took the entire affront, they signed the document for his death, and he would be executed, right? What the heck? He is the only leader to ever be executed by his own people up to this point in European history. Now, somebody, probably some historian is probably watching this channel is going to be like, oh, well, what about Sigmund I or blah, 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 blah. calm down. All right, so so really, really quick. In modern European history up to this point, he's one of the only people that's ever been executed by his own people. Now, interesting little notes on this entire thing. First and foremost, this is actually a picture from the day he was beheaded and stuff like that. That's Charles's head in the executioner's hand right there. And then also, of course, this is Charles' decapitated body and his head being picked up and shown to this entire crowd of people, especially with this little person, or this child being like, ew, that's gross. Now, looking at the entire thing, though, also interesting little fact, every single time now that the Parliament is opened anymore, whenever they start a session of Parliament, interestingly enough, the King or Queen of England has to sit next to Charles I's death warrant, actually in an office while they're waiting for everyone to open up and stuff like that. And it's mainly just supposed to be a symbol while they sit next to it and stuff like that, being like, hey bro, don't cop an attitude with us, because if you do, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be beheaded just like that guy was, right? So it's a very interesting little moment in history, because Charles I has just been executed by his legislative branch, which shows the power of the people in this moment, right? But if Charles is dead, who's going to take over? And people right now, I know that Sydney Nuss and Megan Wolfe and Caitlin Strimlau and Alessandra Galvin and Kelsey Giannis and Audrey White are all like, hey, it's going to be his sons, one of his sons, because didn't he have a couple of kids with Henrietta and stuff like that? Doesn't the other, James and Charles get to take over now? Well, interestingly enough, no. Reason why is because when the war broke out, Henrietta ran away with the boys and went to France, into the Netherlands, into a couple of other areas as well while they were on the run, right? And so that means that we have to pick a new family, question mark? No. That means for the very first time, and only time in English history, England is without a king or queen. I know. All right, so it's absolutely bananas at this moment because England is about to be without a king or queen. They actually transformed themselves into a republic. And who is their leader? Oliver Cromwell, right? Oliver Cromwell comes into this time period and he leads England in this period of time known as the Commonwealth, right? And it's going to last from 1649 to about 1661, give or take, right, if you want to make the argument, because his son takes over for a hot second and stuff like that. Now, looking at the entire thing, though, Cromwell comes into power, and he says, I am no king, but I am the leader of your parliament, and we will be a republic with no monarch whatsoever, and we are going to have a massive whole thing go down without this king, right? And it's going to be ran by Puritans. Oh, no. So which means that so many fun things are going to go away. Now, how does he do this, though? Because it's not like every single person in the parliament was actually a Puritan or whatever. He does this in a very strategic way, okay? He actually fired everyone that did not support him from the parliament, right? He comes in as prime minister and he goes, you're fired, I don't like you. You're fired, I don't like you. You're fired, I don't like you. You don't agree with me, neither do you, neither do you, neither do you. And he fired all the members of parliament that did not agree with the puritanical ideas that he had. And so what he created now is a parliament that agrees solely with his ideas. And there's a nickname for it. The parliament he created was known as his rump parliament. Do me a favor, highlight rump parliament. That's why it's in yellow. It's why it's very important. It's going to be a fill-in-the-blank question on your test, okay? The rump parliament was the parliament designed by Oliver Cromwell so he could get all of his initiatives passed as fast as he possibly could. And do I mean some initiatives, right? The biggest things that happened underneath Oliver Cromwell are going to be a lot of crazy, intense things. One, he invaded Ireland because they were Catholic and killed a lot of Catholic priests and civilians just because he wanted to bring them under the control of, the British crown, and, well, not the crown at this point, but under his control, and then also because he was an anti-Catholic, he's not a monarch. Oh, man, I'm messing up right now. He's also just anti-Catholic, right? So he invades Ireland, leading to a massive, massacre of Catholics and Irish people and Irish priests, right? Now, this is going to lead to a very intense moment. This demonstrates that Oliver Cromwell is willing to use violence against Catholic people, right? Now, interesting little thing going down, though. That means that a lot of people are going to start hiding priests in their house. There's actually a really, really interesting little thing. Like if you lived in Wales or in South England or whatever and you were an actual Catholic, you had to be a secret about it, right? You had to be very, very secretive, or if Cromwell found out, he could kill you, right? And so literally, who's the people that are probably target number one under Cromwell's reign? Priests are, right? And priests have to wear a certain outfit and a habit or else it goes against their religion and stuff like that. So actually in these English homes, there were actually these things called priest holes. It was literally a hole that you would open up a trap door and there's a hole in the floor and there's just a priest hanging out there and he's like, hey, don't let me get killed. And so it's a whole thing, right? And then also, Another big issue that he's going to actually have is he actually has a war, another war, the Third English Civil War is what it's called, because there was like 3 of them. From 1642 to 1651, there were like several phases of the English Civil War. And then the Third English Civil War, he actually fights against Charles I's son, Charles Jr., right? Charles Jr. comes back to England and actually goes up to Scotland and says, look, make me your king, and I'll fight against Cromwell and I'll put us back on the throne. They do make Charles the king, but they also tell Charles, like, all right, get after him. But then he ends up losing, all right? So, like, the Scots wanted Charles, Charles Jr., Charles' son, the dead Charles' son, to be their king and stuff like that. He goes off and fights Oliver Cromwell, and he ends up losing. Now, in this whole crazy process as well, just to give you a little heads up, is that actually while Charles was on the run from Oliver Cromwell, he hides with a family that's loyal to the old Stuarts and stuff like that. And in that house, they put him in a priest hole, and there's a priest down there. And actually, interesting little thing happens. Charles Jr. ends up converting to Catholicism and stuff like that. Just keep it in the back of your mind that Charles Jr. is a secret Catholic, right? So going forward as well, Oliver Cromwell then also starts a massive campaign of banning all fun in England, right? He tries to cancel Christmas. He canceled Halloween. He made it so you couldn't give gifts at Christmas or celebrate or feast or drink alcohol. He outlawed alcohol. He closed bars. He closed theaters. He fined people for missing mass in the streets. He banned sports on Sundays. He said that literally if boys were caught playing football on a Sunday, they could be whipped and stuff like that. There were fines issued for all kinds of stuff like that. You couldn't wear bright colored clothes. You couldn't wear perfume anymore. You couldn't wear ostentatious jewelry. He also pushed this thing known as the Navigation Acts on the colonies, which we'll talk a lot about later, but it's a series of acts that actually told the colonies, like Plymouth, Jamestown, all the ones over in America, that you could only trade with Great Britain, and you could not trade with the Dutch whatsoever anymore. Now, this is going to make the colonies mad. So how is it possible that Oliver Cromwell is making English people mad and is making the colonies mad? The sad part about it is, too, is you just got rid of a monarch you didn't like. You just killed Charles I and stuff like that, and now you're being replaced with a guy that nobody likes either, right? And also a guy that smells suspiciously like a king, right? Because if you look at this whole thing, look at that. That right there is the seal of Charles I, the king that was decapitated and killed and executed by Oliver Cromwell in his parliament. This is the seal of Oliver Cromwell. Charles's seal has a horse that's running with a hunting dog underneath it, and he's hunting in the process. Charles is on a horse, there's just no dog, and it's not running. Looks to me like pretty much like he's basically a king anyway, right? Now, one big positive that Oliver Cromwell brings around is he does allow the Jews to come back to England, which is really, really cool because actually it's one of the very first times in laws that actually had happened in England where there are anti-Catholic laws on the books, but the Jewish people were allowed to come back. Now, a lot of people believe that this is because he believed that they needed to try and stimulate cultural growth, cultural businesses, and then also the economics in England as well. Because how much money are you really making if you got a bunch of people that don't drink and don't do anything, right? So so also though later on he starts freaking out, turns England into a series of military districts, almost like a police force, and he's just as bad as the kings that came before him. So ironically enough, what's going to end up happening though is Cromwell is going to die, right? So Cromwell's going to die eventually in 1660. Cromwell dies, right? He dies from a mysterious fever. They take him and they bury him. And his son takes over. His son's name is Richard Cromwell. It takes over for a small amount of time. But everybody has a nickname for him. Ask me about the nickname. Ask me about Richard Cromwell's nickname, Oliver Cromwell's son. But what ends up happening, though, is Oliver Cromwell dies, and, what ends up going down is they bury his body and stuff like that. And England is like, man, I think we really messed up when we brought Oliver Cromwell in. This Republic thing ain't working for us, right? It's awful. It stinks. It's the worst. You know what I mean? It's so annoying. We can't do anything. Christmas is canceled. Halloween's canceled. All this other stuff we're not allowed to do. So what should we do? So they decide to bring the Stuarts back. And we enter into a period known as the Restoration period, where they're literally restoring the Stuarts back to the throne. So we'll talk more about that when I see y'all in class. Y'all have a good one.